Hello, hello, folks. Hi, Abdullah. Welcome.
Hey, Milva. I'm gonna be this time a little bit kind of like in the back. I might not be able to participate much via voice, but I'll be doing it through chat.
It's okay. Hey,
Bob, all
Brandon.
good over there?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Hey, Mike.
Hello.
Give me a second. I need to go get some tea.
All right, as we're waiting for folks to join, feel free to.
Yeah, Zoom's blurring doesn't really work very well. You can still see what's happening behind me.
Oh, wait. Do I still have the old meeting notes?
You might. That reminds me, I know someone had mentioned, and I tried to fix it in the calendar invite, that the meeting notes were old.
Yeah, because I'm looking at this one, but this might actually be old. It's yeah, the calendar stuff is such a nightmare.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a different, is there a different meeting invite too, or is it the same meeting invite? Wanna
No,
make sure.
the meeting invite should be the same. The Zoom link didn't change. It was just meeting notes.
Okay.
This looks
Yeah,
right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this looks right because I think the June 7th was canceled. June 21st, I know I couldn't quite attend.
Yeah, I facilitated
Yeah.
that one. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So this looks right.
Cool.
Hey everyone.
Hey, Isaac.
Hey Melba. Hey Mike, what's up? Arno, Brandon, Abdullah. And we have Jay today. Awesome. Happy quiet week for those in the US who are some of whom are blessed with a 3-day week and a 4-day weekend. This is the way work weeks should be designed, I think. When we come to redesign the US work week when I'm president, my starting point will be the 3-day work week.
All right, you got my vote.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
One and counting.
Okay, so please add yourself to the attendees list in the agenda document, and we will get started in about 1 minute with welcoming new friends, and then we can work our way down the agenda. I want to start off by actually saying thank you to Mr. Lieberman for chairing last time's meeting. I was out on vacation, and it was extremely relaxing and very nice to know that things were so superbly covered while I was gone. Okay, 10:05. Well, it's something 05 depending on where you are. We're going to get started by welcoming new friends. This is a chance for anyone who's new to the group if you wish to, there's no obligation, but if you wish to introduce yourself, say hi, tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to get from this group, who you work for, and if there's anything you'd like to add to the agenda while you're here, go ahead, and I will pause and let any new friends introduce themselves. Okay, that is just fine. We don't have any new friends that want to introduce themselves, no problem. So we can get started with the agenda. I'm actually going to do a little bit of reordering here. Let's move Guac up. I think we talked about this a little bit last time. I wasn't here. I'd love to get Mike, if you could give us a readout. There are two parts to this, as I understand it. Like, part number one is, hey, there's donating Guac, there's code in Guac, and so that you're bringing Guac into the OpenSSF requires an LF legal review and trademarks and all kinds of legal stuff, just in terms of the mechanics of bringing it into OpenSSF at all. And I understand that that's in process. One of the things I don't have a great understanding for at the moment is there stuff which this working group, the supply chain integrity working group, specifically needs to do to bring Guac in? Like, do we need to take a vote, or is that part taken care of?
So I think probably Arno knows best. I think that there's I found myself a little confused in some of the documents where it seems like they want you to say what working group you plan to fall under before you enter OpenSSF. But the way that it kind of is worded is like you need to go to the TAC first to get accepted, but and then you go to a working group to then get in there. But the documentation says what working group do you plan to be a part of? And so I don't know if it's just like the idea is you go to a working group, they say, yeah, that seems pretty reasonable, and then you go to the TAC then approves, and then you go to the working group for a final vote. I'm not 100% sure on that. I do believe that the idea is to get consensus from the working group that it is worthwhile to be accepted, but I'm not exactly sure what the exact timeline is there. Arno, do you have any sort of details?
Well, so no. So I think the reality is what you described, and I don't think we have enough experience to know the exact process. I'm not surprised that the process has barely been used so far. It was developed about a year ago, and we're still trying to, figure out what it means. I think, both cases can happen. Actually, you may face a case where somebody says, hey, we have this project, there's enough interest, we think it should come to OpenSSF, but we don't know where to go. And they go first to the TAC, and then the TAC might have recommendations of where to go. But I think in this case, it makes sense to come with the recommendation from the working group, saying this working group we talked to, they accept us. So this is the proposal that you put before the TAC.
Got it. That makes sense. So I think, and I recall some of this. We had some similar ambiguity when S2C2F came in, and there was. I remember S2C2F was in high demand across a number of working groups, including end users. I think maybe best practices and supply chain integrity. And so there was even contention for what working group that would end up in. It seems to me, like, as I understand it, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, like Guac has a desire to join the SCI working group, sees the greatest synergy there. My take is yes, it seems to me to be a great fit. If I'm looking back at the vision doc, which we've been working on for the last 6 months, one of the top level elements of the vision was upstream security practices universally valuable by downstream automation. So it seems to me that Guac is an example of that downstream automation looking to evaluate upstream security posture, or that's a part of what Guac is doing. And so it seems to me that Guac is a great fit within the SCI working group vision. But I'd love to hear from others if they have more on that, or objections, or ideas for where Guac might alternatively belong in OpenSSF. I'm just keeping up the notes here. Okay, unless anyone's got objections, I'm going to note no objections in the note. So we have an audit. We've got a +1 from Melba. And Marcella. I mean, it feels to me like this isn't an especially controversial ad. I think WAC is a great fit into the portfolio actually, and it's been really encouraging seeing the net attraction that Guac has in the community. Thank you, Arno. So I think, I will do another call for, objections, comments, anything. I'll do that on the mailing list and in the Slack for completeness. But unless there are objections or strong feelings against this idea, I think we can consider that Guac is a good fit for SCI. Arno, go ahead.
Yeah, not to object at all, but I think it makes sense. But for the sake of it, is there a possible alternative? Is there another group, Michael, that you think, oh, maybe it could go there, or it makes sense there as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of different groups it could potentially fall under. So for example, there's the well, it depends on the scope a little bit. I think this one is probably the one where like if we have the Venn diagram, it overlaps with stuff under this group a little bit more than some of the other groups, but there is like the securing software repos group because, hey, that's kind of doing a lot of stuff on trying to sort of focus on some of those things. There's also the security tooling group for obvious reason, but this particular tool feels a little bit broader than some of the security tools that they're kind of focused on. Which are kind of more, at least from what I've seen, a little bit kind of more on the actual active security scanning and that kind of thing. And then there's also potentially the securing critical projects, just because one of the pitches as well for Guac is to have a public service eventually, similar to something like deps.dev, OSV, SigStore itself, and those sorts of things. But it seemed like this group seemed to be where there was more overlap in the sense of like the idea behind Guac, right, is to sort of work with your SBOMs, work with SALSA attestations, potentially be used as a way to prove S2C2F, conformance, and things like that.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for entertaining my question, because I can tell you, I understand the argument you made for each of those, but I think SCI is better than any one of those.
Yeah,
So
I think it's a better fit.
That is a great exercise, because it makes me feel like, okay, this is not just a fluke. We're not saying, oh yeah, this one, why not? I actually think, I don't know how other feels, but other people feel, but I think this is better. So thanks.
Yeah, and we did a little bit of a roadshow to a couple of the other groups as well. I'm blanking on all of them, but we went to the end user working group and some others just to kind of talk about what we're doing, and just kind of feel out a little bit of this. And we know that also at some level there's a lot of overlap between the groups, but this one seemed to be the best fit.
That's awesome. Okay, so I think on this front, I think there's next actions in two streams. Stream number one is, Mike, I'm assuming you'll continue to press through the LF process, trade bugs, IP, all of that kind of stuff, done in the code. I will cross the T's and dot the I's on just making sure that we've surveyed maximally for feedback and people's opinions on this. So I'll go to the mailing list and Slack. I put in notes where we're at today with this group, but I want to make sure that we're maximally inclusive and really hear from everyone who has an opinion on this. So I'll take that up. And awesome. I mean, I think it'll be a great fit. I mean, as you know, Mike, I'm a big fan of Guac, and I think it's got a wonderful future. So next item I had on the agenda was we have a quarterly review with the TAC next week. This is snuck up on us all. I went to the tech a quarter ago, where I think we were probably just about to launch Salsa 1.0. You know, we had some progress to report on S2C2F. I'm happy, you know, pulling together, and I will either today or tomorrow, kind of a draft deck. Oops, I'll probably use the same overall structure, and I'll share it out. But as I'm putting that draft together, are there any headlines or items which people want to make sure are included as we talk to the tech? Melba, go ahead.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I had on my list to talk about was a charter. We need to put it in front of the TAC. And I do have a GitHub issue in the repo associated to that. So I think it's ready, I think, to review with the TAC.
Got it. And I sent the, so about a month ago, he actually just went on vacation. I sent the chart of the kind of the vision document that we have to the tech. I know at least one person looked at it because Crow jumped into the document, added a couple of comments. Apart from that, I didn't get anything back from the tech. But yes, I'd like to take that and put that probably up front in the deck as something that we want action from them on, is formal thumbs up that, you know, they've at least scanned the thing and they think it's reasonable, and then we can move forward under the aegis of tech appreciation of that thing. On Salsa, I want to talk about you know, 1.0, where we are, futures, which will be build level 4 and other tracks. So I think there's kind of a vertical and a horizontal expansion of Salsa, which we can imagine over time. I think Chris Cui is looking already at build L4. We may even have a draft for what that may look like, or the beginnings of a PR. So I want to paint that picture for Salsa. For S2C2F, Jay, do you want me to leave a blank slide or two for you to fill in? Do you want me to take a crack at kind of painting where we are with S2C2F, or is that Adrian? How would you like to handle an update for the tech on S2C2F, Jay?
Yeah, please leave a blank slide, and it'll be either Adrian or I, or some combination of both of us that fills it in. We can bring that before the SIG and have a discussion amongst the SIG as well to see exactly what kind of content should goes in it. But I definitely would love a slide there to put some input.
Got it. Okay. Guac, I have, I think, all the raw materials I need to work from. But Mike, I'll tag you in the slide so you can take a look at that as a Guac rep. The only other thing we might want to talk about to the tech about this working group is Fresca. Do we have anything we want to say? I confess, like the last time we spoke, Mike, I think we were struggling with resourcing in terms of, we had lots of ideas, but in terms of like hands on keyboards, people writing code, we were a little light on that front. Is that still the case?
A little bit. And after some conversations at stuff like the Open Source Summit and some other things, a lot of the feedback we had gotten, and this is just generally from folks who have been looking at Fresca, and these are folks, some of the folks have been on this call as well, is you know, Fresca is a pretty good, you know, example of an implementation of an architecture, but as far as like an actual tool that people would deploy and would want to use in a really kind of ongoing basis, that's probably not the case. And so with that said, right, like there could still be opportunities for Fresca. You know, once every few weeks, somebody pings me about like, hey, I was checking out this thing with Fresca, but like we haven't really gotten a lot of traction on it. I don't want to say it's necessarily abandoned, but I would say it would probably have to be reimagined a little bit. You know, and which, you know, I think a bunch of us would be interested in, but yeah, I don't think there's really been much movement on that end, you know, outside of obviously keeping things up to date and that sort of thing.
How do you see, and I think I may have asked this question before, but how do you see Fresca alongside Sterling toolchain? Like, do you think that there's relevance or overlap, or that Fresca becomes the basis of the Sterling toolchain, or what do you think about that?
So I wouldn't say the basis. What I think is, what I would imagine is if we take the Sterling toolchain as an architecture, the Sterling toolchain, by an architecture, I mean like an actual high level design.
Right.
You know, something like Fresca could be an implementation at the, you know, an implementation of the build capability, right? It could be an
Got it.
implementation of that build capability, and like an example implementation. And I think the things that, and this is actually some of the stuff that I was going to talk about in my thing after Melba's, which is like, I think the need for something like Fresca is a lot better when we have better APIs around how we build a lot of this stuff out. But I think I think it's still useful because it also, the thing I've been using it for in the Sterling toolchain conversations is also a way of like, hey, look, if we just build a whole bunch of stuff and say, here's how, like we pick a bunch of tools and try to get them all to interact with each other, you're going to run into the problem of everybody's toolchain is different and people are going to want to pick and mix and match things. They're not going to want to just say, here's the whole thing for my build capability. They're going to want to say,
Yeah.
I want to use Tecton, I want to use Jenkins, I want to use this, and I want to use this. And, you know, as long as they all sort of meet the interfaces.
Absolutely. And I mean, it kind of feels like, and some of this is, you know, work I have ongoing in the Google open source security team space as well, is trying to think of what's that kind of concept level articulation of the SDLC, where you can say, okay, I want to you know, plug in a different build here, or I want to, you know, dependency management, I want to use X, or artifact registry, I want to use Y, and what are the pluggable pieces and what are the protocols or mechanisms via which they plug and unplug into that overall SDLC. I mean, basically everything to the left of production. We have a number of ideas of how you might run a toolchain left to right, but then once you look at wanting to swap different technologies into each capability spot, that's when, to your point, we're like, oh, what are the APIs and how do I discover the source of provenance and where is this thing stored and is it a sidecar, or, you know, we have all those types of problems. I think so. This is great. This gives you raw materials to do a Fresca slide too. So hopefully by the end of tomorrow, I'll circulate a draft deck. If folks have a chance to look at that, Jay, I'll tag you in it as well for S2C2F content, and we can take forward the tech review there. And with that, Melba, you're up. I know you've got to go at 12:30, so I want to give you your 7 minutes.
I do. Thank you. Let me share screen. So we already talked about the charter, but what I wanted to do was give an update on the repo. I did update the repo quite a bit, removing old branches, closing old issues. I did update the charter, and then there are new issues in here, and I've labeled some based off the positioning SIG. I'm working with Jennifer Bly to figure out how could LF or OpenSSF help us with some of the stuff in terms of the, not necessarily identifying the content, but helping with like editing and actually publishing or setting up webinars, etc. But did want to give a heads up on that. And for some reason, even though I was able to edit this 2 weeks ago, I cannot edit. And I created this calendar invite. I can't edit the calendar invite anymore, which is fantastic. So I can't fix that, but apparently one of the docs is not correct in the meeting invite. So I'll have to talk to operations to figure out why I can't edit my own calendar invite. But yeah, there are a few. This one is assigned to you and Jay because I can't attend the TAC meetings. I always have a conflict. And then the rest are what we have in plan for the positioning SIG coming up. Again, that's it.
That's great. Thank you, Melba, and thanks. I mean, it's I appreciate the work that you've done cleaning up the branches and closing the old issues and updating the charter and so on. It's valuable, but goes unmentioned and unnoticed too much. So thank you for that. It's definitely appreciated. And then Jen Bly, in terms of like, does Jennifer have resources to help with copy editing and building content, or is she just a kind of OpenSSF comms? Like, how should I think about Jen's role?
Yeah, so that's what we're discussing. Apparently they don't, because what we want are like video editors, right? We want to have
Right.
micro videos, and sure, we can come up with the content, but we're not video editors, and
Yeah.
we're not TikTok, I wouldn't say savvy. I'm not going to talk about anybody else, but I'm not on TikTok. I don't trust TikTok, so I'm not TikTok savvy or anything like that. And
You're
she
missing a
said
treat,
that,
by the way. I got to recommend TikTok. I'm a bit of an edit.
and so she said that they were discussing having that talent in their staff, and they don't in terms of video editing capability. So that she's going to bring it up at the next staff meeting. On the side, we're going to have a conversation of what they could potentially help with. So I'm going to talk to her about what we're looking to do to see if they could assist, but I'm not sure as of yet.
Got it. Okay. Taking a note of that. That's super helpful. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that a big part of what OpenSSF needs to be doing is marketing itself and awareness and advocacy. And if content production is not core to that, I don't know what is. Like, it feels to me that content production should almost be one of the core competencies of OpenSSF in terms of across all modalities, whether it be blog posts or TikToks or whatever. So I hope Jennifer manages to find skills that we can tap into. That would be kind of awesome to have that upgrade. Thanks, Melba.
Thanks, Mike, for
Mike.
letting me go first.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Over to you at SCI API. I want to hear more.
Yeah, well, actually, right before that, I did want to also comment that I think the LF does seem pretty interested from what I've been talking, also about the sort of whether it's micro video content and yada yada, and I think they might even be willing to, if poking them, to maybe even pay just an external company to do it. Especially given that I believe some of it can be tied back to pulling in more end users as paying members. So I think that's a thing that they're looking for. But yeah, so anyway, so one of the things I think that had got brought up, it's nothing necessarily we need to act on right now, but it's something that I believe some folks have been starting to talk about as far as the Sterling toolchain and similar sorts of initiatives is, and it's also been a bit of a concern, is a lot of folks are like, hey, it's great that there's all this, like Salsa, for example, has a provenance type, a metadata document. But the thing that people are saying is like, hey, depending on what builder I use, I have a different way of consuming it, and those sorts of things. And so I think folks are starting to folks have been starting to ask around stuff like, how do I consume this stuff? How do I start consuming these things from like a library perspective? Is there consistent sort of APIs when we look at something like a Sterling toolchain standpoint of like the supply chain integrity piece of like, hey, how do I know that I'm, conformant with S2C2F in an automated way, and those sorts of things. And then also with stuff like Guac coming down the line, Guac wants to be able to just sort of say, I don't want to have to, in Guac, we don't want to have to create like, well, if let's say Jenkins is a Salsa builder and some of these other things are all Salsa builder, here is the Jenkins integration for Salsa. Here is the, like, to pull out Salsa, I should say. Here is this integration to pull out Salsa. It's more like, are there APIs around this? I know there's discussion about the same thing from the Vex standpoint. How do we distribute Vex? But one of the things, so that's I think a thing that folks are starting to talk about, and it's not necessarily a literal API at this very second. But some folks have been poking around with the idea of using stuff like OpenAPI, Swagger, and so on as a way of saying, hey, here's all these data types like your Salsa data type, and so on and so forth. And hey, this thing returns me a Salsa metadata document, so I know I can always pull that out of that thing. Anyway,
that makes a ton of sense. Arno.
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, Mike, did you look into CD events? So CD events is kind of like it's from the a sister project at Linux Foundation, the CD Foundation, which focuses on continuous delivery, and they have developed a specification for events related to the build and the continuous delivery. And they have actually started getting momentum among tool developers to get support for CD events built into the different tools. But this has the potential of being a system that would allow us to kind of more easily plug different tools. And so I was wondering if you looked into that.
Yes, and I think actually, yeah, that's definitely where I think it should end up, like as far as the common language. But yeah, I have looked at it. In fact, actually poking around with some of the stuff in there to sort of build a POC tool that hopefully in the coming weeks or coming months I can demo to this group. It'll be an open source thing. But yeah, the idea would be, and I believe that also they want to do the same thing with Sterling, or hopefully with Sterling Toolchain, is to sort of say, what if the API for all the security stuff was just CD events, so that you get in stuff like somebody makes a commit, that's a CD event. You know, somebody runs a build, that's a CD event, and part of that CD event of the output of that build could be, here's a collection of metadata documents, and here are the metadata document types. So it should give you a salsa document, and you can go and be like, okay, well, since I have a salsa document ingester, I should just be able to pull anything using that, which I think is super, super valuable. And so, yeah, definitely poking around with it. It probably needs a little bit, like there's probably going to need to be some stuff, some changes, but yes, I'm very looking forward to really diving in deep with that one.
All right, cool. Thank you. I'll put the link to the spec for those who don't know about it to the chat. I think it's
and for
development.
Yeah, and for folks who aren't familiar, it's essentially like it's like a subset of cloud events. So it's like cloud events that have a scheme, have been structured specifically for sort of SDLC type events. So builds, commits, deployments, that kind of thing. And there's also discussion about either to create something like security events, or to which would be itself a subset of cloud events, or to say that CD events themselves, there might be a category of CD events being something like security events.
And I mean, if I may add, I think one advantage with regard to other technologies that are in that space is this is language independent. Right. I mean, some of the names you mentioned earlier, the problem is they often are specific to one programming language. And in this case, I think one of the biggest challenges we have with the Sterling toolchain is to make something that's broadly applicable across all the different, programming languages and environments. So I think this one has that advantage. But thanks.
One of the questions I had on this, Mike, was, so in talking with Brandon and others, one of the things we're looking at is, hey, at a given point in the SDLC, you want to, gather intelligence about upstream, and that applies to artifacts. So, hey, I want to look at salsa provenance or SBOM. I want to look at, when this build occurred or what artifacts went into that build. Like some of the things I may want to be interested in upstream of me includes things like a maintainer was added to this open source project. That's a relevant, relevant event to me assessing the security of that. Or, maybe a maintainer wasn't added to the project, but maybe the email domain of one of the maintainers expired and was re-registered, right? Which is some kind of identity takeover risk. Like, does CD events, or does your conceptualization of this space include those type of events as well? They're kind of project specific events rather than CD specific events?
At a high level, yes. I think I also have some open questions as to whether or not, if you look at, since CD events itself is it's sort of a schema on top of cloud events.
Mm-hmm.
I would need to kind of take a closer look to kind of see, would it support that? Because like, you know, cloud events itself is supposed to be very, very broad. It's just kind of like any sort of event you might think of, which of course leads, you know, because there's the balance, right? It's, if you go so broad, it becomes very difficult because all the various tools will need to implement all, you know, every, you know, you lose a lot of the interop because every single client will have to say, well, I support this type of message, but not that one, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Whereas CD events being a subset, okay, cool. This is a very structured set of like 10 things I support or whatever. With that said, I think it's probably worthwhile to, and this is some stuff that I know that they're, I think, interested in. Last time I went to their group, which has been a while, but they're interested in some of it. They do, I think, have, you know, they have some level of stuff in there and under their docs, and I'm curious because that's actually a good point and something that's probably worthwhile to better understand.
I'll take a closer look at CD events. I've not looked at it closely in a while, and I think I mean, your point is a good one, right? That I think there's in any of these specs, there's going to be some balance struck between syntax and semantics, right? Do we define an abstract syntax which can encode any possible event, but like that remains unspecified, or do we say we're going to, you know, specify these 23, this enumeration of 23 known event types, and here's how they're described. And somewhere in there is a balance, and I don't know where CD events is today. I don't know enough about it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think, because at the end of the day, we do want to support all of that, right? And whether or not some of these things is like a subset of CD events or like I imagine it would probably just be another type of cloud event. Whether or not it's a type of CD event or a type of cloud event is a different sort of story.
Right.
I would say most likely it would probably be a CD event. And, you know, we might just say that, you know, here are categories of CD events, because like the thing, right, that is, you know, the biggest challenge I think right now that we're running into with some of the Salsa tools is Salsa, it's very broad in how you might be able to build this, to build a Salsa builder, right? It's very broad. There's outside of just sort of saying, here is the structure of how it gets built, of the document, the actual metadata document, there's not a lot in terms of like, here's how you should build it, here's how you should integrate it, blah, blah, blah. And so when it comes to like, and then also when it comes to those builders, right, there's currently no standardization around distribution. You know, in certain cases, the builder pushes it, you know, in the case of the GitHub stuff, the builder will push it as a part of the release. We'll push it as an artifact that is part of that release. In the case of Tecton, it can push it to the OCI image. It can push it to MongoDB and other document databases. It can push it as an annotation to the Kubernetes cluster. And at the end of the day, though, like those are all sort of very different ways of doing it. And is there like something like, oh, if it got pushed out as, for example, a CD event, hey, I published a Salsa thing that gets published as a CD event, great. Then anything that supports CD events could then consume it. So it could get pushed to something as a CD event, or it could push the CD event to a log stream, and that, you know, subscribers on that log stream can then do whatever they want to it, right? I think there's a lot of, and once again, these also come with their own trade-offs, right? One is a little simpler. The other one, you know, requires somebody to have an event-based, you know, setup.
Yep, that makes sense. I mean, is there anything that you'd like this group to help with or dig into or bring to next time's meeting or bring to you on this?
I think the big things I would, you know, besides obviously, I think some of the stuff that's happening in the Sterling toolchain, which is trying to figure this out at a very, very, very broad level of like, you know, with the idea of the CD, my understanding from the Sterling toolchain side is if we end up going this route, what would happen is the entire SDLC would have a set of CD events or similar that would say, you know, a developer on their workstation downloads a new dependency, that would become a CD event that could then be, and this is an organization, not an open source, right? Obviously, we're not tracking what everybody downloads, but like, okay, okay, that becomes a CD event. Somebody pushing out their code becomes a CD event. The code getting built gets, becomes a CD event, and all those, things you described of, hey, a new person gets added to a project. It gets scanned, it generates an SBOM. All of these things would probably be events. So I think the things that I know would help me with some of the stuff that we're looking at and doing is really trying to understand, like, what are the things that people are looking for here, like what are their what is the biggest concern? Like, even if it's, I don't even necessarily need to think that it has to be a particular event at this point, but if somebody said, hey, my biggest issue is I don't know, like from a supply chain integrity standpoint, like, oh, when I download a dependency, I don't know where it came from. Oh, okay, cool. That's probably maybe the #1 security, event. Or, in terms of this particular group, when I look at, for example, Salsa and S2C2F, I'm looking at, like, how do I bridge the gap there? And some of it could be if, we start to talk about S2C2F and having S2C2F, being able to say, hey, the tools use something like CD events. Great, I can prove S2C2F conformance because I'm getting all the right events to show that.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. That's interesting. Yes, I mean, like, we need to think through, like, kind of what's the attestation format for S2C2F need to look like, and how do we generate that automatically, and where do the trust anchors need to be for that attestation? But to your point, like, you could imagine, being able to validate the correct stream of events happened. It wasn't just that Mike imported this dependency, but then I saw the vulnerability scan happen. Then I saw the SBOM being stored. Then I saw this thing going to the artifact registry. Like, the correct sequence of events occurred for me to conclude that this dependency was added in conformance with S2C2F.
Yeah, when I think through the challenge, though, I see the other side of this, which is that, sure, we want to have the attestations and someone watching and make sure that everything happened right. But the other side is that we actually want to know that our pipeline isn't vulnerable to someone merging a merge request with only one approver on it. And so it's not enough just to get a report that, hey, someone pushed that up there and there was only one approver on the merge request. There needs to be actual controls in there that are actually checking that the CD event came through for whatever they're looking at. And I'm thinking through the whole ecosystem, and the challenge is going to be to get all these different players to actually implement all the controls in all the different places that it would need to take to get this to happen.
I think that's true, but at least at the organization level, you can then enforce some policies that check that, all the right things have happened in the right order and so on. So yeah, it may not scale to the whole industry. You still, depend on other pieces in the chain to do the right thing, other parties. But at least at your level, you can do better than if you don't have that kind of system. So
yeah,
it's.
and I mean, sorry, go ahead, Brendan.
I was going to say, it's getting the vendor buy-in on some of those things. Like, are you going to get a CD event out of GitLab when someone does a merge? Are you going to get a CD event out of some security scanner that says, hey, I did an ingestion on this open source thing into this repo here, so now you know that it's been pulled in correctly? It's going to be a lot of work to make that happen.
I agree. I mean, at a super high level, like, I began to conceptualize this as kind of what we need is almost a supply chain control plane, right? Where, and the supply chain control plane, you can imagine being like kind of, there's a metadata substrate that each actor in the supply chain is publishing data into that substrate. And at any point in the supply chain, you can pull data from the metadata substrate and evaluate it for some, policy conformance, and say, do I want to move this artifact, or do I want to continue the process to the right of this thing based on what I'm seeing in metadata today? And that metadata could be Salsa provenance or SBOMs or S2C2F attestations or the right sequence of CD events or whatever it may be. But at least conceptually having this idea that there's a supply chain control plane, in that, there's a metadata substrate where each actor in the supply chain can push data in there, and it can also read data out in order to be evaluated and actuate policy. I say that at a very hand-wavy product manager level. Implementing it is a simple matter of coding, of course. Mike, you had your hand up for a minute there.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that's actually one of the things that longer term, we're looking to also bake into something like Guac, right? So the idea would be the stream would obviously have to come in via some sort of event bus, but the idea would be that all of those where the idea is Guac would potentially be that data plane, or Guac and a combination of things, because the thing that folks are looking at, right, is that you need to have, one of the biggest things, one of the biggest questions that's been asked is like, okay, where's the data, right? If you don't have the data, how are you making these supply chain decisions? And a lot of times, the data doesn't exist. And so that's a big concern. And then in addition to that, the supply chain control plane, which my company is also working on. And I think the thing for it is we're looking actually hoping, right, for the Sterling tool chain to also describe the API of what this control plane might look like. And then, different vendors could implement that the way they see fit. The reason why I say that is just, it's very difficult to, today, right? Like the thing that you want is you want to have a unified view into this thing, right? You want to have a unified view and control against it, right? The big question that people say is like, oh, I have an agent on every developer's workstation, but the policy that's baked into the agent is very different than the policy that happens at build time or ingestion time or runtime. And there's no like overall arching like policy that says, hey, in dev environments, you should be doing this. In production environments, you should be doing that. On a developer's workstation, you should be doing this other thing. And so all of that information gets lost. And the policy is often inconsistent.
That makes sense. Marcela, you had your hand up briefly there.
Oh, yeah. I just started typing to the chat. I didn't want to take up too much time. But yeah, I could absolutely, either me or one of my collaborators, I think they're familiar to most folks here. Santiago, the sort of lead of Intoto, is on that project, and a few other folks involved with Guac. Yeah, so it'd be great to get the feedback from this group and see how we can honestly just work with the community on this, because ultimately I think that would be our goal, to somehow contribute some features back to Guac, or yeah, just in general work broadly with this community. So yeah, I can talk to one of them and see if we can line up some kind of demo or presentation or something.
That would be awesome. So what I'll do, Marcela, with your permission, is I will kind of propose an agenda item for next time, tag you in that. If you can bring it next time, great. If you need another a month or something, that's great. But I'd love to have you bring it to this group. We could all look at it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Give your hand up.
Yeah. So one of the things I actually wanted to also throw out there, as I know one of the biggest challenges, and I'd love to hear folks' thoughts, like Marcella and other people, is like one of the biggest challenges with something like this being a control plane is usually, I would say, most organizations, some obviously very, very large organizations, might have multiple SDLCs. But most organizations, I think, have one SDLC, whereas a lot of organizations can have multiple, for example, runtime environments with their own control planes and yada, yada. So I'm curious, when it comes to something like this, it's like, when you think about like a supply chain control plane, you're thinking about controlling from as far left of the developer as you can. In the case of open source, it's just where they push the code. But in the case of like an organization, an employee or whatever, you might even be controlling their workstation. And then as far right as potentially runtime, because you want to validate that the only things that are running in production environments are the things that went through your, supply chain control plane. And so that's a whole lot of stuff, which I know is also one of the problems with a little bit of the Sterling tool chain, is that if you look at it, right, the Sterling tool chain is kind of like all software development from end to end is kind of a very broad scope. So I'm curious what folks' thoughts are on, like, do folks agree with that? Do folks think that's kind of like, if so, is that something that people feel as a tractable problem? Yeah.
It feels to me, very difficult, ambitious, but probably the right thing for us to be looking at. Like, it's not a problem that we're going to get a solution for this year or even next year, but I feel like at least if we can align today, the people who are working in this area, align conceptually on, hey, we all have in our heads this similar kind of breakdown the problem, where we think of, metadata fabric, we think of, the SDLC looking like this, we think of, the need for a control plane, we think of, like, how do we evaluate and actuate policy, and how do we push that as far left as possible? At least if we agree and kind of can get alignment on the way to conceptualize the problem, and at least that'll keep us moving in more or less the same direction, even as over the next 2, 3, 5 years, it's going to take us to kind of more deeply specify this thing and work out all the kinks and figure out exactly what we need. I feel like we're at the stage of, gathering kind of broad alignment on what does this space look like, and kind of the boxes and arrows level, right? And then, okay, once we're all agreed on what the boxes and arrows are, we can then begin to open each individual box and look at what needs to go inside there, and what does the API need to look at, and so on. So I think, I agree with you that it feels massive, and yeah, not something which lends itself well to someone saying, oh, well, I've got a 2-pager on this, I have a solution already. But I feel like a 2-pager on this is the shape of the problem, we're all roughly agreed on that, and we're all roughly agreed on the kinds of capabilities we need to bring to bear to work on this problem. Now we can work at one by one, specifying those capabilities and going down to the next level of detail. But I realize that I have a product person's bias and not a technology person's bias, or at least not a programmer's bias.
What would that look like? I mean, like, what would that look like from a how would we parse that out? I guess, God, it seems like a control plane would be like a very large endeavor to take over, especially when you need to have you would need to first survey different orgs, different industries, different who's doing what where, and then, like, decide, well how would we as a
this meeting is being recorded.
I guess a middle a place where people would come to get guidance or tutelage, but consider a universal entity creating this. Wouldn't that look different for different organizations, for different industries? And then how would we tackle that broadly here?
So I guess I think of it at this level, Jay, right? That, like, I think that this diagram, which I'm showing here, I hope you can see my screen, at a squint, I think this is applicable to almost every organization. Like, I think every organization more or less has an SDLC which looks kind of like this, where you have upstream supply, and you have a process taking things from left to right over to production at the right. And I think every organization has some concept of source management. Every organization has some concept of build or release management, or every organization of sufficient maturity. And I think once you have this idea of, hey, what does the supply chain control plane look like? You begin to do things like this, where, hey, build produces assigned provenance, pushes that into your metadata fabric. That then is verified and evaluated and actuated as policy at some point to the right. What does it look like for dependency ingestion? And so I feel like getting alignment at this level, like, again, like boxes and arrows, like, I feel like if we can all agree that the problem looks more or less like this, and we can begin to look at what capabilities do we want this overall architecture to deliver, that's where I feel like we can usefully get alignment right now.
Yeah, I agree with this. Like, but for instance, right, we're getting ready to produce a follow-up paper for for the White House to talk about where we're at now with the mobilization plan, right? For instance.
Mhm.
Now, this control plane will look a lot different, or how you operate the control plane, I guess, or what type of controls you put around metadata and attestations will look a lot different in the federal government than it does in the private sector. How would we I mean, we can articulate that, I guess, in blog form, we could say that, right? But then when we're doing stuff that we're asking, potentially going to be asking for funding, or potentially going to be asking for some level of partnership, or potentially be asking for participation in, we may not necessarily have a read on the right tools or technology that's required at that level to facilitate properly safeguarding the metadata and attestations for the public sector.
Definitely agree with you. Definitely agree. Like, and so I like, and again, like this diagram here is not at the levels of tools and technologies, it's at the levels of capabilities. And I think that, like, my contention is this diagram at the capability level would apply to federal government. The federal government, I don't know what they're using to do release management policy, but I bet they have one. And I bet it looks kind of like it's articulated in this diagram. And I think as long as we can conceptualize about the universe in terms of the same core capabilities, we can say, well, the federal government uses, I don't know, Kyverno X for admission control policy. Google uses BCID package enforcer for admission control policy. Someone else uses Sigstore admission controller or whatever it is. Like, at least we can start to talk the same language about what role in the overall logical view these technologies are taking. So I mean, I agree with you that I don't think, like, I don't want to get to the level, or I don't think we're near getting to the level of having this diagram where each box has a product name or a technology name in it, because there's always going to be dozens of possibles in each boxes. But at least we can conceptualize, well, what are you using for release management? What are you using for ingestion management? Are you using this? Okay, great.
Right.
So when you say you're using System X for ingestion control, I know that System X is reading from the supply chain, the metadata, it's evaluating policies, it's actuating policies, it's then writing attestation about what it did to the control plane for subsequent downstream evaluation and so on. And it's kind of, it's technology independent, but at least we can start talking about the capabilities in the same language, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Good.
We're about out of time. I just want to make sure. Let's see. So Marcela, I will work with you to schedule looking at some of your sort of supply chain control plane concepts. Supply chain control plane sounds sort of Dr. Seussian in some kind of way. But
Yeah.
it would be great to have you bring that, and we could all take a look at it, and we can dive a little bit further into this. Before we break in the next 2 minutes, is there anything else anyone wants to bring up? That's a no. Well, in that case, 2 minutes back across 8 people. That's a full quarter person hour that we get back. Make sure to step away, get a glass of water, pet a cat, get some fresh air, and I will see you all next time.
All right, thank you.